Much.
Well, I wanted to ask a question to something you've all mentioned, which is the debt. And you look at the numbers since 2003, the amount of money that households are paying for transit in the city has gone up from $200 to $350. The amount of debt that's owed per household, if you break it out, has gone from $200 to $270 per household since 2003. 25% increase in the police budget, and 70% of the current operating budget is employee costs. So there doesn't seem to be any way around it. If you're going to tackle the debt, you have to tackle the debt, you have to tackle the police budget, and you have to tackle transit. What do you do then to balance the book, something that has a lot of Torontonians very concerned? Ms. Thomson, I'll begin with you. In your first 100 days, what specifically will you do, can you do, to stop the increase in the debt of the City of Toronto?
In how many days?
First 100 days. What could you do in the first 100 days?
Oh, that's...
I don't expect you to tackle it in the first 100 days, but begin with an action.
The begin would be a hiring freeze, because that's the biggest cost we've got. So let's put in a hiring freeze, let's maintain it, and let's look on how we can make the employees more productive. Right now there's a real low morale. We have to start listening to our front lines. So changing operating so that the decision makers are listening to our front lines. And we have this problem across the board in every department. You talk to somebody that works, say, as a bus driver at the TTC, he's not being heard. And they've got no sense of responsibility or accountability, so they don't really have any stake in their job. So I think one of the first things you do is you take a look at the management and get them focused on creating better systems of communication so that those making decisions can hear the front lines and work with the front lines to make them more productive.
Mr. Smitherman.
Well, I think one of the least known facts in the City of Toronto, or about the city, is that for 2 years running, the city is going to post an operating surplus. And it's not, most people don't believe it because every year our city projects itself as broke and bankrupt. But I think it's important to know that as a starting point. Well, the first 100 days, actually, I've already said, my first 100 days is about bringing the City Council together and focusing on a hiring, spending, and tax freeze for 2011. Attrition with respect to the existing base of employees is going to be the primary strategy to manage costs going forward. And of course, I would still allow hiring to take place in those emergency services like ambulance, fire, and police. But overall, from the standpoint of the swelled ranks of middle managers and other positions which are not forward-facing, which are not customer service roles, we're going to have to look at some attrition there. There's been extraordinary growth in the number of employees, and that's going to be the primary strategy to manage the books, to be able to have a freeze on taxes in 2011, and to eliminate from Toronto's sad history this story where we project ourselves as broke and bankrupt, which I think makes us seem powerless when, of course, we're not. Thank you.
Mr. Rossi.
The operating surplus is an utter fiction, and the fact that Mr. Smitherman doesn't understand that shows his lack of financial awareness. That's been a drawdown on reserves. That also involved a re-amortization of the debt last year from a 30-year period to a 40-year period, and some cash was brought in when that was done. So that is not a true operating surplus. And one of the problems that the city has, as C.D. Howe also pointed out, is that it separates the operating and capital budget. And since we don't have a different tax treatment on the capital budget, it makes no sense. It should be together so that we know what we're actually spending. If we're going to bring the debt down, and we need to do it quickly, sale of assets is going to be a key piece of that. The blue ribbon panel that the mayor put together that had some of the best financial thinkers in the city, in this country on it, called for it. That would be step number one. Step number two is dealing with the burgeoning cost of labor at the city, because from 2002 to 2009, as the Board of Trade and TD Financial pointed out, labor costs went up by 6.5% a year, each year, compounded, three times GDP. That's a $400 million delta just if we'd kept it at 3%.
Thank you, Mr. Rossi. Mr. Ford.
Thank you. The first 100 days is equivalent to 3 council meetings. So you're looking at, because we meet once a month for 2 days, sometimes 3 days. So the first 3 council meetings, I'm going to ask for a report. Obviously, everything is generated through a report. Abolishing the $60 car registration tax and the land transfer tax, And then I'm going to have my own staff budget. Obviously, we don't, the mayor doesn't need a $2.5 million staff budget when Mel Lastman did it for, I think, about $1.7, $1.8 million. So I'm going to reduce my own staff budget by $500,000. The councilor's office expenses is the so-called office budget, which is not. It is strictly an expense account. I want to reduce that down from $50,000 to $30,000. I want to reduce our staffing. Every councilor has $210,000 to hire staff. You do not need that amount of money. All I have is 2 staff and pay them $100,000. So I want to reduce that.
How about the big stuff, though? The big stuff.
No, I'm telling you what we're talking on the large volume. And I'm talking. Some people can't relate to billions of dollars. So when I'm talking the hundreds of millions of land transfer tax, but I'm also asking in the first 30 days, and then obviously other people can relate to the nickels and dimes. So not everyone are business people or obviously understanding your operation and the size of your businesses. So you have to relate to everybody, and this is what I'm going to do in the first 100 days. I'm going to tackle large issues, and I'm going to tackle small issues.
Thank you very much. Thank you. Mr. Pantalone?
Well, you're going to hear a different kind of argument from me. All the people around here are Minnie Mike Harris's and Michelle Harris here to my left. Because it seems to me that the kind of thinking that you're hearing is that less will give you a greater city. You know, I don't buy that. I think Toronto is a good city to begin, could be better. The issue of the debt is not as bad as is made up by those who want us to take that road. I mean, Moody's rates our bonds. They gave us AA1 ratings. You're in the business, you know what that means. We're doing very, very well. I think we're better even than the province of Ontario. We don't have a deficit. You know, we have the lowest residential tax in the GTA, and we're lowering the taxes on business, as you heard before, on business. So therefore, the idea that somehow we gotta shut down the place and stop investing in subways because of the debt, or a rec center in needy neighborhoods because of the debt, is not true. You know, I'm here to build a city, not to start tearing it down and lead us to other cities which through tax cutting means services cuts, which leads us to Detroit, not to Paris.
Thank you very much.
Can we do rebuttals? Or?
I actually, would you like to continue on with this
Sure.
line of questioning? Okay, then we'll keep it at 1 minute each and we'll work down the line. Go ahead.
Okay, the Board of Trade is forecasting a $350 million deficit next year. And the fact is, our spending is just not sustainable. We have to bring costs down. So I recommend to all go online, check it out. It makes sense, and they're not wrong. This year we happen to find some money, but look at our reserves are gone. Where have they gone if we aren't having a deficit each year?
Mr. Smitherman.
Well, just to respond to a couple of comments. Firstly, I think that it has been well said that the City of Toronto, for infrastructure purposes, has debt levels which are relatively healthy. There are people that have the philosophy that municipal government shouldn't have any debt, but I think that for a big municipality that's got long-term obligations, it's very much necessary. Mr. Rossi doesn't like the use of the word surplus. I would agree that some of the strategies that have led to cash surpluses occurring are wobbly strategies, but you can't pretend there isn't cash coming forward into 2011 because there is some cash coming forward, and those can be applied in a 2011 context, and we can stop with the wobbly strategies. I don't think it's a bad strategy to amortize an asset for the reasonable life of the asset. And the City of Toronto's adjustments on that basis, I think, is a very, very reasonable one. But overall, I think that we need to make sure that there's no net increase in debt at the City of Toronto, and that we don't play hocus pocus in terms of the strategies to live within our operating budget each and every year. And on September 27th, I believe I'm going to lead with a very, very good strategy that is transparent and easy to follow, that should give people guidance around what my budget will look like.
Thank you, Mr. Smitherman. Mr. Rossi.
Well, Mr. Pantalone is fond of calling us mini Mike Harris's, but he's Miller Lite. If you've loved the last 7 years, then it's going to taste great. And if not, it's going to be less filling. And the only reason that Moody's gives us an AA1 is because the city keeps taxing and pays the interest on the debt. Just because your banker loves you to have debt doesn't mean you should continue to have it. And to Mr. Ford's claim of, just having to find a couple of percent because that's the cost of his tax cuts, $230 million a year. Well, the Board of Trade is calling already for about a $350 million deficit for next year, deficit pressure as Ms. Thomson put out. So you're really looking at close to $600 million. And I'm sorry, but office expenses of the councillors and an occasional $80,000 a year water plant guy at City Hall is not going to add up to those numbers. So he's trying to bribe you with his own money, with your money, without a plan to actually fill the gap.
Mr. Rossi, thank you. Right over to Mr. Ford.
Well, we have to look at contracting out services, the janitorial services for the police stations. That could save $5 million. Well, 7 years ago, there was a report that came forward that said we could save approximately $5 million a year contracting out garbage, for example. And just in Etobicoke alone, we saved $2 million a year and never had a strike. So if we do that right across the city, I was conservative in saying $15 to $20 million. There was a report that came out last week or the week before saying it could be as high as $50 million. So we have to start getting the private sector to deliver these services, not always the government. And we have to. We can't have Peter Street Shelter, for example, $5 million. We budgeted. Now it's up over $11 million, equivalent to $275,000 per bed for one homeless person. You can buy a condo for that matter. For that amount of money. $43 million for the St. Clair right-of-way. $43 million we budgeted. It's not over $120 million. We went $80 million over budget. You'd be fired in the private sector. You ever went up to your CEO and produce numbers like that? They wouldn't tolerate it.
Mr. Ford, thank you. Mr. Pantalone.
Well, Mr. Rossi has got a good grip on finances. He thinks about building, with city money, mind you, an amazing, magical underground expressway, which is going to bring all that traffic, which is at the Allen and Eglinton, down to the Gardner, and the Lakeshore, and all those ramps through Forest Hill, St. Clair, College Street, Dundas. Imagine it, that kind of situation costs something like $20 billion US in Boston. He really knows how to manage our money and give us the transportation that we need. Mr. Smitherman, on the other hand, he figures that if you freeze your taxes, and if we go $40 to $60 billion, and which means you have less revenue, but you know what? Let's spend $5 billion more than what transit said of city money to build transit. Now, I think we're all good at math. That doesn't seem to make sense. I'd like to suggest you got to be realistic, start with what you got, and make the best of it. We have challenges in the city, but we've managed fairly well. That's why we are the great city that we are. You're glad to live in Toronto because of the programs the last 7 years of Obama. It's not perfect, but you know what? It ain't that bad either.